Hey guys, so I was trying to think of Cuphead videos that I could make aside from a boss ranking, and decided that the next natural ranking that I could make would be to rank all of the weapons in the game. However, some people have already done that before, and I wanted to make it a little more interesting, so I'm going to take it a step further. I'm going to rate every single piece of equipment in this game, from weapons to charms to super arts. Basically, if it's usable, it counts. I'll be sorting them into tier lists based on what type of equipment they are, and use that to determine my ideal loadout in the game. Also, keep in mind that I'm not ordering the tiers for this particular list, just because there are some of these where it's kind of hard to measure whether one is subjectively better than the other, so I'm just not going to do that. I'm going to sort them into tiers and call it a day. I don't really feel like there's much more introduction needed, so let's get right into it. Before we start with the first weapon, I just wanted to say that I did the worst possible way of analyzing each weapon for this list. Basically what I did was that when I recorded footage, I only used the weapon that I was currently getting footage for with no charms, no B-shots, or anything. This was a very bad idea considering the fact that I am not very good at video games. Add that on to the fact that I was already experiencing stream delay through OBS that I hadn't gotten used to yet, and it resulted in me pretty much torturing myself while getting footage of each weapon. So take my opinions with a grain of salt, because I did this in a terrible way. Also, just to be clear, I'm not really trying to rate these objectively, rather than I'm just trying to rate them based on my own personal playstyle. The weapons that I find most useful aren't going to be the same as what other people will find useful. It all just depends on what kind of a player you are. All that is to say that if you disagree with any of my ratings, just know that it is, in fact, a personal attack on you, that I did it to piss you off in particular, and that you probably smell bad. Now on to the first weapon. The pea shooter, the first weapon in the game. It fires small blue shots directly forward or whichever direction you're aiming, and does average damage. It's a solid starter weapon and a good way to get you introduced to the style of this game, and it can be pretty fun and grueling to do challenge runs with only this weapon, but it doesn't really have much use beyond that. I will say that a good design aspect of it is the fact that the upsides and downsides pretty much directly weigh each other out, resulting in pretty much the most average weapon you could ask for. It's pretty solid and isn't annoying to use, but doesn't really have much use after you start the game, and most of the other weapons are just much more useful. I'll put it in B tier, just on the brink of C, since it's a good weapon, but just gets outshined by pretty much every other weapon in this game. Next is the spread shot, and we're already at one that's kinda hard to talk about. This fires 3 red lines of shots directly in front of you. If you can manage to hit all of them, it does a ton of damage, but it has extremely short range. This can be extremely useful during phases of bosses where you're close to the target. Hell, this is pretty much the only thing I ever use during the double fight. But when using it by itself, it can really become a nuisance. Like I said, in order to deal full damage, you need to hit all the shots, which can be really difficult, especially if you're playing a boss with lots of moving parts. I'm going to slap this one in B tier also, since it's useful in specific scenarios, but can be pretty hard to utilize effectively if you're trying to use this and only this. Next we have the chaser, which, depending on who you ask, could either be the best or the worst item in the game. Me personally, it's alright.
It's alright!
Basically all this does is fire small green stars directly at the nearest target without you having to aim or anything. It can come in clutch if you're playing a boss with attack patterns that you're not that good at, but good luck if you're going to try and use only this, because it deals a laughably small amount of damage, and will make almost any boss take way longer. It's a weapon that you should really only use when you have to, but in its credit, it is really good at what it tries to go for. It basically negates any need to focus on aim and allows you to just focus on the attack pattern, which, like I said, can be pretty useful. I'm still going to put this in B though, mainly because of the fact that it deals such little damage means that I only ever really use it in tandem with other weapons, and also because there's another weapon later on that basically just takes what Chaser does and does it much better. Next is Lobber, which is actually quite solid. I used Werner to display this weapon since I feel like Werner's boss does a good job at showcasing the upsides and downsides of this weapon. Basically what this does is fire a bouncing blue ball in front of you that will bounce for a little while before popping. It does a really good amount of damage, but its range is pretty weak, so you have to make sure you're either close to the boss, or that you get creative with how you aim it. The bad range is honestly the most fun gimmick of this weapon, and its biggest weakness simultaneously. On one hand, when you actually use this well, it can be pretty satisfying, but if you end up needing to actually move around and the boss isn't right in front of you, you're gonna have a tough time. And Lord have mercy on you if you have to aim upwards. This is why Werner actually showcases this weapon perfectly. The first phase of this boss is a complete joke with Lobber. The second phase is also quite easy to manage, unless the bottle caps soft lock you. But the third phase with the cat is actually quite tricky, since the cat stays smack dab in the middle and you are required to move around to spots where you can't reach it. Plus, you literally just cannot kill the ghosts. That all showcases why Lobber is a really solid weapon that just has some very significant downsides. I'll put it in A tier since it can be really useful for certain bosses, but not S tier since it's really annoying for others. Next is Charge. Like the name implies, rather than shooting rapid-fire shots, you can charge this weapon up to produce one powerful shot. It's unique from every other weapon in the game in this way, and it does a great amount of damage, but it can be kind of a hassle to recharge every single shot you make, and if you miss even one, it can be a huge time loss. Plus it shoots automatically when you dash, which can be kind of annoying to charge it and dodge at the same time. I guess you could just shoot the uncharged shots, but like, there's not a single person in the world who actually does that. If you use charge uncharged, I don't fully trust you as a person. Still, it does a ton of damage, so I'll put it in A tier. Next is Roundabout, and I love this weapon. It's quickly became a staple of my loadout alongside another weapon we'll get to later. Basically what this does is fire out a blue boomerang-shaped object that will fire forward a little bit, and then shoot backwards across the entire screen. If you aim forwards, it doesn't go very far before turning around, but if you aim backwards, you can do a ton of damage. It's fun to use, does great damage since you can basically just sweep the screen with bullets, and has the best range out of any weapon in the game. Easy S tier, there's pretty much no downsides for this one. This was by far the easiest weapon to get footage for. I mean, probably because I was using it on Goopy Legrand, but give me a break, I was tired. Now on to the DLC weapons, and starting off with what is easily the best weapon in the game, the Crack Shot. Essentially, this fires out a small red bullet in front of you that does good damage, and if it doesn't hit anything, it cracks open and launches a smaller bullet towards the nearest target. This is super useful because even if you don't hit the first shot, you still get another small shot that'll basically automatically aim to where you need to go. It's like Chaser but better, since now there's actually incentive to hit the boss without letting the bullet crack open since it'll do more damage. But if you don't want to do that, you can also choose not to. It's super versatile, really easy to use, and really helpful on pretty much every single boss in the game. Easy S tier for sure. And the next weapon, Converge, is pretty good too. Basically this fires in the same pattern as the Spread, except not doing as much damage and firing all the way across the screen. However, if you need to shoot something up close, locking and aiming causes the shots to converge into one line, doing more damage to wherever you're aiming. It's a solid mechanic and is only really brought down by the fact that on some bosses it can be kind of a hassle to use the converging mechanic in a good way, but on others such as Phantom Express it can be really useful, so I'll give this a solid A tier. It's really solid. Honestly, all of the DLC weapons are pretty well. Next we have Twist Up. Yeah, I know this weapon has its fans, but I just find it more of a hindrance to use than anything. It does decent damage, but the fact that the shots fire upwards makes this a nightmare to use on most of the bosses unless you're really good at aiming, which I'm not. I'm sure that if you're good at making split-second decisions and calculating where the shots will end up firing if you shoot in a certain direction, this is a great weapon, but I suck at video games, so I'm gonna have to put this in C. It's the only weapon in the game that I actively never use. Some may call it a skill issue, and to that I say, you're absolutely right, but it's my list, so apologies, but it's gonna have to go down here. Anyway, that's all the weapons in the game talked about. Now I'm gonna knock out all the EX weapons real quick. You get access to these by using one super card, which you can get from continuously doing damage or by doing a parry. If you save at 5, you can get a super art, which I'll talk about after this. I'm just going to review these quickly so as not to waste too much time so that we can get to the charms, and also because there's not as much to say about many of these, so if these aren't as in-depth as the weapon reviews, then apologies. The Mega Blast. This fires a giant Hadouken-type fireball directly in front of you. Pretty solid EX move, does quite a bit of damage, pretty versatile, I'll put it in A. The 8-Way. This fires 8 giant spikes in all directions around you. Like the Spread itself, its main problem is that it's hard to hit all 8 spikes unless you're fighting a character that moves around in the background, and that's really the only way you can do maximum damage. Still, it's somewhat effective if you hit just a couple, so it can get a B tier. Chaos Orbit. This sucks. It sends a bunch of chaser bullets flying around you, and you have to get really close to whoever you're fighting in order to hit any of them. And unlike 8-Way, it really doesn't even have the benefit of still being effective if you only hit a couple, because they're chaser bullets. Usually I end up putting myself in danger just trying to hit the boss with this, or I get lucky and hit all of them on the first try, in which case I deal like 5 HP of damage. D tier. Kablooey. Basically just a giant lobber shot, does good damage. A tier. Radio Barrage sends a big explosion in front of you. It does good damage, but its range kind of stinks, so I'm gonna put it in B tier. Jumbo Rebound. Sends out a large disc that does a ton of damage, and it moves around with you, but if it touches you, it disappears. Can be pretty useful in moving bosses like Goopy or Moonshine Mob, but otherwise it can be pretty hard to utilize. B tier. P-Turret. This is the best and most unique EX in the game in my opinion. It sends out a smaller planet that makes smaller crack shots to shoot at the boss, and if you parry it, you can send it flying right at the boss. These are super fun to utilize and are useful pretty much anywhere. Sometimes you can mess up when trying to parry it and take damage, but just get better, S tier. Electro Bolt. It sends out a giant bolt of lightning across the screen. It has great range, but doesn't do much damage, so I'll put it in B. And finally, Cyclone Spiral. It sends out a tornado, does good damage, B tier. Better than the twist of itself. Now moving on to the super arts. First we have the Energy Beam. It spills a massive beam of milk out of your head horizontally that hits everything in its path. It also makes you invincible when you use it, making it incredibly versatile if you need to get quickly out of a bad spot. This is an easy S tier, it's Cuphead's best super art by a landslide. Invincibility. This does exactly what its name implies, it makes you invincible for a few seconds. It can be helpful against long bosses like King Dice, but doesn't last very long, so you're usually better off using the Energy Beam. B tier. Giant Ghost. Easily Cuphead's most unique super art. It spawns a huge buff version of your soul that moves around faster than you, but in all the same directions. It's good for bosses like the Devil, where there's stuff going on everywhere, but it can be pretty hard to utilize effectively without messing up on other bosses, so I'll put it in B. Now we get to Chalice's super art, starting off with the Spiral Pillar. Basically just an upward version of the Energy Beam. I can't really think of any situations where this would be more useful than the Energy Beam though, so this gets a solid B tier. Not bad, just pretty difficult to actually utilize effectively. Next is the Shield Pal, and this one's an easy S. It basically just gives you a free hit point whenever you use it, which can be super helpful and has saved me in a bunch of situations, especially during Saltbaker. It's a great compromise for when you want to use Chalice, but also the parry sugar. Finally we have Ghostly Barrage, and this one's another S. It basically takes all the mechanics of the Energy Beam and turns them all up to 11, aside from the invincibility, which doesn't last as long. Plus it looks sick as hell, and sweeps pretty much every obstacle with a hitbox off the screen. Oh, also, I forgot to mention the Plane EX moves, but they're both S tier. Moving on. Now we get to the meat of this video. The meat of this video, that being the charms. These all give a special effect to the player, usually to make the game easier in some way. This is easily the biggest section of the video, having 11 entries. I'll be ranking them based on how useful I personally find them to be, and how effective the charm it grants is. Without further ado, let's get into it. First we have the Heart. This lowers your strength, but gives you 1 extra HP in return. I don't think that this is a bad charm, but it does make many bosses take way longer than they need to, and when your strength is as low as this, the game pretty much just becomes an endurance test. Plus, if it's an extra hit point that you need, then there are much better options in this game that don't lower your strength at all, such as Chalice's Shield Pal or the Parry Ring. Because of that, while this is useful when you're just starting out, and it's certainly solid, I'm going to leave it in B tier. Next is Coffee. This will constantly increase your super meter automatically, and you get that in addition to whatever you earn while playing. On the one hand, this is a pretty cool gimmick, and if you're going for 6 out of 6 super meter on the end screen, then I suppose this would be pretty useful, but on the other hand, just parry stuff, it's way faster. B tier. Next is Smoke Dash, one of the most popular charms in the game. This makes you invincible while you dash, which can be a huge help for almost all of the bosses in the game, especially King Dice, where there's constantly obstacles that are significantly harder to dodge without this. However, it's not quite S tier in my opinion, because while its effect is really solid, I rarely find myself needing it once I've gotten good at dodging attack patterns, and I usually find myself gravitating towards other charms instead, where the buffs are stronger and more useful to me personally. Again, this is just about my personal playstyle, and I can totally understand why someone would give this an S tier, but I'm just going to leave it an A, just because I don't personally use it that much anymore. Next is the Pea Sugar. This makes your first parry automatic without requiring you to press the button, and I'm going to be real, I've never once felt the need to use this. I guess it could be useful on bosses with upward parries, but there's only like 2 of those in the entire game. Otherwise, there's no use for this aside from saving a tiny amount of time, so C tier. Next is the Twin Heart, which gives you 2 extra hit points but significantly lowers your strength. All of my thoughts about the extra heart apply to this one, however, I would not have been able to beat the Devil on my first playthrough without this thing, so it does earn some points for that, I guess. B tier. Our last main game charm is the Whetstone, which turns your first parry move into an attack. Like the Pea Sugar, it's a neat gimmick, but there's not really much use for it in the actual game aside from letting you get a tiny bit of extra damage if you want, so C tier. Now we move on to the DLC charms, some of the best charms in the whole game. Starting off with the Chalice Cookie, and I mean, this has gotta be S tier. Mrs. Chalice is just so much fun to use, and her unique moveset makes the entirety of the DLC significantly more fun to play. Plus, using her just basically combines a lot of the upsides of the other charms. She gets an extra HP and invincibility roll that works similarly to Smoke Dash, and also a unique parry dash and double jump. Just a cool addition and super fun to play as, and she's easily the best charm in the game without any contest. I wrote without any context. Broken Relic. literally does not do anything F tier. Cursed Relic. This is the only charm in the game that serves as an active debuff, lowering you to 1 HP, and making it so that every time you shoot, you switch to a random weapon. However, you also get the effects of several other charms, those being Whetstone, Smoke Dash, and Parry Ring. You have to beat 7 bosses with it in order to unlock the Divine Relic, and I honestly think this is a pretty fun challenge, but for the sake of fairness, since it doesn't do much helpful for the player, I'll put it in C. Divine Relic. Basically the same as the Cursed Relic, except you start at full HP. This means that you get to combine 2 of the best charms in the game, and also Whetstone is here too. And you get a super meter buff, with the only downside being that your weapons are still randomized. However, if you play strategically, this isn't too big a problem, so I'll put this in A tier. It's pretty fun to use. And finally, we get on to my other favorite charm in the game, that being Parry Ring. This gives you an extra HP on your 1st, 3rd, and 7th parries of the fight. This is super useful, and unlike the extra heart charms, it doesn't give you a strength debuff. All you have to do is parry, and this single-handedly makes parrying a much more fun mechanic, since now you get rewarded for it with an extra HP. And on top of that, it has all the benefits of Chalice's Shield Pal, being super helpful on bosses you don't know as well. This is pretty much the only charm that I ever use anymore, so easy S tier. So yeah, that's the ranking. My next video will probably be related to Smash Bros in some way, but we'll see exactly what it ends up being. And as soon as I finish my Mario Kart Cup ranking, I'm going to make sure to do a Cuphead boss ranking next, since I think that'd be a ton of fun and I'd have a lot more to say. Anyways, that's all. Thanks for watching and have a serviceable one.
And I be doing it to death, and now I move a little foul. A nigga better call a rap, and everybody know my style. Niggas know that I'm the best when it come to doing this. And I be banging on my chest, and I bang in the east, and I banging in the west. And I kinda give you more, and I will never give you less. You will hear it in the street, and you can read it in the press. Did you really wanna know what's next? Let's go. See the way we on it, and we all up in the race. And you know we gotta go and try to keep up with the pace. And we struggling and hustle and set it, and I get it, and we go and gotta do it, take it to another place. Gotta taste it, and I gotta grab it, and I gotta cut all through this traffic just to be at the top of the dome. But I know I gotta have it.